She owned more restaurants than most people could visit in a lifetime. Yet on the night of her birthday, no one would give her a seat. The city of Chicago sparkled beneath a cold October sky as thousands of lights reflected against the glass towers downtown. Luxury cars rolled past crowded sidewalks. Laughter drifted from rooftop bars. Couples celebrated anniversaries. Families gathered around candlelit tables. It was the kind of evening designed for memories. But for Victoria Hayes, it felt like a reminder of everything money could never buy. At 38 years old, Victoria was one of the most successful CEOs in America. Financial magazines called her brilliant. Business networks called her unstoppable. Investors called her a visionary. Yet none of those titles followed her tonight. Dressed in a simple navy coat and carrying no entourage, she stood alone inside one of the city's most popular restaurants. The warm scent of grilled steak and fresh bread filled the air. Crystal glasses clinked. Soft piano music floated through the dining room. Every table was occupied. Every chair seemed taken by someone who belonged somewhere. Victoria approached the hostess stand with a polite smile. "Good evening. I have a reservation under Hayes." The young hostess typed quickly, frowned, then checked again. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I don't see it here." Victoria's smile weakened slightly. "That's strange. It was confirmed 3 weeks ago." More typing. More searching. More uncomfortable silence. Finally, the hostess looked up apologetically. "It appears there was a system error. Unfortunately, we don't have any tables available tonight." Victoria blinked. For a moment, she simply stood there. Around her, conversations continued. Servers carried trays overflowing with food. A group near the window laughed loudly over birthday cocktails. Nobody noticed the woman standing alone. Nobody knew the restaurant itself was part of the hospitality empire she owned. "Not even one table?" she asked softly. "I'm afraid not." The hostess looked genuinely embarrassed. "We're completely booked." Victoria nodded. "I understand." She stepped aside. Her voice never rose. Her expression never hardened. Years of leadership had taught her grace under pressure. But disappointment settled quietly inside her chest. It wasn't really about the reservation. It wasn't even about the restaurant. It was about the realization that she had nowhere else to go. No family waiting for her. No close friends expecting her arrival. No husband texting to ask when she'd be there. Just another birthday ending exactly like the last several birthdays had ended. Alone. She moved toward a corner near the entrance and looked through the large front window at the city beyond. Traffic lights glowed red and gold. The reflection staring back at her looked successful, composed, admired by millions. Yet behind those eyes was a loneliness no magazine had ever photographed. A server walked past carrying a small chocolate cake topped with candles. The entire dining room suddenly erupted into applause as strangers sang happy birthday to someone near the center tables. Victoria watched from a distance. Then she smiled sadly and lowered her gaze. Nobody sang for her anymore. Nobody even knew it was her birthday. Across the room, at a modest table near the back, a man noticed. Ethan Walker sat with his 9-year-old daughter Sophie. Their meal was simple. Nothing fancy. Just burgers, fries, and a shared slice of pie waiting for dessert. Ethan wasn't watching the crowd. He wasn't scrolling through his phone. He was listening to his daughter talk excitedly about a school art project. But then Sophie stopped mid-sentence. Her small eyes focused toward the entrance. "Daddy?" she asked quietly. Ethan looked up. "Yes, sweetheart." Sophie pointed carefully toward the woman standing alone by the window. Her voice softened. "Why does that lady look so sad on her birthday?" Ethan followed her gaze. His eyes settled on Victoria Hayes. He didn't know her name. He didn't know she was worth billions. He didn't know she owned hotels, restaurants, and office towers across the country. He only saw something far more important. A woman standing completely alone while everyone else seemed to belong somewhere. And for the first time that evening, Victoria wasn't the only person in the room who felt the weight of that empty space. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. He simply watched the woman near the window while Sophie continued looking in her direction. The restaurant remained full of noise and celebration. Glasses clinked. Silverware tapped against plates. Conversations overlapped beneath the soft piano melody drifting from the corner stage. Yet somehow the woman standing alone seemed separated from all of it, as though she were looking through the evening instead of living inside it. Sophie leaned forward slightly. "Daddy, is it really her birthday?" Ethan glanced at the small chocolate cake being carried toward another table and then back toward Victoria. I do not know, he answered honestly. But she looks like someone who could use a friend tonight. Sophie lowered her eyes to her plate. Children often notice things adults overlooked. They noticed sadness hidden behind smiles. They noticed loneliness hiding in crowded rooms. And Sophie had spent enough years watching her father carry quiet grief after losing her mother to recognize it when she saw it in someone else. Nobody should be alone on their birthday, she whispered. Ethan felt those words settle heavily in his chest. Across the room, Victoria checked her phone. No missed calls. No messages waiting. Just another stream of business updates, market alerts, and meeting reminders scheduled for Monday morning. She locked the screen and slipped it back into her coat pocket. The glow from the city lights reflected softly across the window beside her. For a moment, she considered leaving. Perhaps she would stop somewhere for coffee. Perhaps she would return to her penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan and spend the rest of the evening answering emails. It would not be the first birthday she had spent that way. It would not even be the worst. Still, something about tonight felt different. Perhaps because she had hoped, however foolishly, that this year might somehow feel less empty than the last. Meanwhile, Ethan sat quietly. His daughter returned to her fries, but he could tell she was still thinking about the woman. He knew that look. Sophie had inherited her mother's heart. She could never ignore someone hurting. A server approached their table. Can I bring you folks anything else? Ethan glanced at the untouched slice of apple pie sitting between him and Sophie. Then he looked at the empty chair beside them. For years that chair had remained symbolic. Sometimes he chose it unconsciously. Sometimes he noticed it immediately. It was the seat where his wife would have sat. The place that reminded him both of loss and of love. Most nights he ignored it. Tonight he could not. The server smiled politely. Sir. Ethan blinked. Actually, give me a minute. The server nodded and walked away. Sophie watched her father carefully. You are thinking about asking her, are you not? Ethan laughed softly. Am I that obvious? Sophie smiled. Only when you are about to do something kind. Across the restaurant, Victoria adjusted her coat and prepared to leave. She took one step toward the door, then another. The hostess offered an apologetic smile as she passed. Victoria returned it graciously. She never blamed employees for honest mistakes. Yet the disappointment remained. She had built an empire serving guests, creating experiences, teaching thousands of employees how to make people feel welcome. And somehow, on the one night she wished to feel welcome herself, she had nowhere to sit. Ethan noticed her moving toward the exit. Something inside him made a decision before his mind fully caught up. He pushed back his chair. Sophie immediately grinned. I knew it. Ethan shook his head, trying to hide his nervousness. Maybe she says no. Maybe, Sophie replied. But maybe she says yes. He looked once more toward the woman heading for the door. Then he stood. Not because she was important. Not because she was wealthy. Not because he expected anything in return. He stood because sometimes dignity begins with a simple invitation. And as Victoria Hayes reached for the restaurant door, a calm voice carried gently across the room. Excuse me, ma'am. She stopped and turned. Ethan Walker raised his hand with a warm smile and pointed toward the empty chair at his table. Victoria paused with her hand still resting on the door handle. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had heard correctly. The restaurant seemed to soften around her. The piano continued playing. Conversations drifted through the room. Yet her attention settled entirely on the man standing beside a small table near the back. Ethan lowered his hand but kept his warm smile. There was no pressure in his expression. No expectation. Just a simple invitation offered with quiet sincerity. Sophie sat beside him grinning as though she already knew how the story would end. Victoria glanced toward the empty chair. Then back toward Ethan. Are you sure? She asked. Ethan nodded. It is a big table for 2 people. Sophie immediately added, and it is your birthday. Victoria blinked. How did you know that? Sophie shrugged. You looked like it should have been a happy day, but it was not. For the first time all evening, a genuine smile touched Victoria's face. Small at first. Careful. Almost forgotten. She walked slowly across the dining room, while curious glances followed her. A few diners looked up briefly before returning to their meals. To everyone else, it was an ordinary woman joining an ordinary family. No one recognized one of the wealthiest business leaders in the country. And strangely, Victoria preferred it that way. When she reached the table, Ethan pulled out the chair for her. Thank you, she said softly. I am Victoria. Ethan. He gestured toward the young girl. And this is Sophie. Nice to meet you, Sophie said proudly. Victoria took her seat. Nice to meet you too. For a moment, none of them spoke. Not because the silence felt uncomfortable, but because it felt peaceful. The kind of silence that exists when nobody is pretending to be anything other than themselves. A server approached looking slightly confused. Can I get you something, ma'am? Victoria opened the menu automatically, then laughed quietly. You know what? Surprise me. The server smiled and walked away. Sophie leaned forward. Have you had a good birthday? Ethan gave his daughter a gentle look. Sophomore. What? She asked innocently. Victoria surprised them both by answering. Not really. Sophie nodded as though that confirmed everything. I knew it. Ethan chuckled. My daughter notices things. That is a gift, Victoria replied. The warm glow from the hanging lights reflected across the polished table. Around them, the restaurant buzzed with life. Families shared stories. Friends celebrated milestones. A young couple laughed over dessert near the window. For the first time that evening, Victoria no longer felt separated from it all. She was part of the room instead of standing outside it. The server returned with a plate of food and set it in front of Victoria. A few moments later, another employee arrived carrying a small dessert topped with a single candle. The kitchen heard it was your birthday, the young waitress explained. Happy birthday. Victoria stared at the candle. Such a small thing. Such an ordinary gesture. Yet her throat tightened unexpectedly. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. Sometimes respect meant allowing someone space for their emotions. Sophie smiled brightly. You have to make a wish. Victoria looked at the tiny flame dancing above the candle. For years, her wishes had revolved around growth targets, acquisitions, expansion plans, and impossible goals. Tonight, none of those came to mind. Instead, she looked at the father and daughter sitting across from her. Their clothes were simple. Their meal was modest. Their table was far from the best spot in the restaurant. Yet there was a warmth here that money had never managed to create. Victoria closed her eyes for a second and made a wish she had not admitted even to herself. Not for success. Not for wealth. Just for connection. When she opened her eyes again, Sophie was already waiting. What did you wish for? She asked. Victoria laughed softly. If I tell you, it will not come true. Sophie accepted that answer. Ethan smiled into his coffee. And somewhere deep inside Victoria Hayes, a feeling she had not experienced in years quietly began to return. Hope. The candle eventually melted into a tiny pool of wax, but the warmth surrounding the table remained. The three of them continued talking long after the dessert plates had been cleared away. Outside, the October wind swept through downtown Chicago, rattling a few leaves across the sidewalk. Inside, however, time seemed to slow. Sophie told stories about school projects, art competitions, and her dream of someday designing houses with secret reading rooms. Ethan listened with the patient attention of a father who understood how quickly childhood passed. Victoria found herself smiling more than she had in months. What about you? Sophie asked suddenly. What did you want to be when you were my age? Victoria laughed softly. Everything. Everything. Sophie repeated. Astronaut 1 week. Veterinarian the next. Then a lawyer. Then a singer. Were you good at singing? Sophie asked. Absolutely not. Ethan chuckled into his coffee. The sound surprised Victoria. It was not loud or dramatic. Just genuine. The kind of laughter that came from being comfortable. For a moment, she simply listened to it. There had been a time when she heard sounds like that every day. Before boardrooms. Before investor calls. Before success became something that demanded every waking hour. Ethan noticed her expression. You okay? Victoria nodded slowly. Just remembering. Neither of them pushed further. Some memories needed room to breathe before they could be spoken aloud. A few minutes later, Sophie excused herself to visit the restroom. As she disappeared around the corner, a quieter silence settled between the two adults. Not awkward, just honest. Victoria traced a finger along the rim of her water glass. You have done a wonderful job with her. Ethan looked toward the hallway where Sophie had gone. His eyes softened immediately. She makes it easy most days. Most days? Victoria asked. Ethan smiled. Not all days. That earned another laugh from her. Then his expression grew thoughtful. Truth is, she is the strong one. Victoria studied him carefully. Most people would say the opposite. Ethan shook his head. After her mother passed away, I thought I was protecting Sophie. Then one day I realized she was helping me survive too. The restaurant lights reflected softly in Victoria's eyes. She understood more than he realized. Loneliness came in many forms. Sometimes it arrived after losing someone. Sometimes it arrived after achieving everything you once believed would make you happy. She looked around the busy dining room. "It is strange," she said quietly. "What is?" Ethan asked. Victoria considered her words carefully. "You can spend years surrounded by people and still feel invisible." Ethan did not answer immediately. Instead, he glanced around the restaurant, as if weighing her observation. "I think everyone wants the same thing." "What is that?" "To know they matter." The simplicity of the answer caught her off guard. For years, consultants, executives, and motivational speakers had filled conference rooms explaining human behavior. Yet somehow a widowed carpenter had summarized it in 4 words. To know they matter. Sophie returned moments later carrying a paper napkin covered in doodles. "Look," she announced proudly. "I drew us." Victoria accepted the napkin. The drawing was charmingly imperfect. 3 stick figures sat around a table beneath a giant birthday cake. One figure had long hair. One had a baseball cap. One held a balloon nearly twice her size. Above them, Sophie had written a single sentence in large, uneven letters. "Best birthday ever." Victoria stared at the drawing. Her vision blurred slightly. She blinked before anyone noticed. Then she folded the napkin carefully and slipped it into her coat pocket. Not because it was valuable, because it was priceless. And for the first time in many years, she found herself wishing the evening would not end. The evening eventually came to an end, but none of them seemed eager to acknowledge it. Outside, the city glowed beneath a blanket of amber streetlights and reflections dancing across rain-dark pavement. The restaurant had begun to thin out as diners settled their checks and headed home. Victoria stood beside the table holding her coat, reluctant to leave a moment that had felt unexpectedly precious. Sophie wrapped her arms around her before anyone could overthink it. "Happy birthday, Victoria." The simple gesture caught her completely off guard. For a second she froze. Then she hugged the little girl back. "Thank you, Sophie." Ethan smiled as he watched them. There was no awkwardness in the moment. No performance. Just genuine kindness. The kind that could not be bought, negotiated, or scheduled on a calendar. As they walked toward the exit together, Victoria paused near the door. "I am glad I met both of you." "Us too." Sophie answered immediately. Ethan nodded. "Take care of yourself." Victoria looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. Then she smiled. "You too, Ethan." A black sedan waited across the street. She had arranged it earlier, though neither Ethan nor Sophie noticed anything unusual about the vehicle. To them, she was simply a woman heading home after an unexpectedly meaningful birthday dinner. Victoria climbed inside and watched through the tinted window as Ethan and Sophie disappeared into the Chicago night. The driver glanced in the rearview mirror. "Home, Ms. Hayes." For several seconds, she did not answer. Her fingers rested on the folded napkin Sophie had given her. Finally, she nodded. "Yes." But her thoughts remained at that small table in the back of the restaurant. The following Monday morning, the top floor of Hayes Hospitality Tower buzzed with activity. Executives hurried between meetings. Assistants reviewed schedules. Financial analysts prepared reports. Victoria sat at the head of a conference table overlooking the city skyline. Normally, she moved through meetings with remarkable focus. Today was different. During a discussion about quarterly growth projections, her attention drifted unexpectedly. She remembered Ethan laughing quietly into his coffee. She remembered Sophie proudly showing her drawing. She remembered feeling seen instead of admired. There was a difference, a significant one. After the meeting ended, her chief assistant entered carrying a stack of documents. "Anything else today?" Victoria hesitated. "Actually, yes." The assistant waited. Victoria chose her words carefully. "I would like information on someone." 20 minutes later, a slim folder sat on her desk. Not because she abused her position. Not because she intended to interfere in anyone's life. She simply wanted to know whether the kindness she had experienced that evening had been as genuine as it seemed. She opened the folder. Ethan Walker, age 42, self-employed carpenter and custom furniture craftsman. Widower. 1 daughter. Small workshop on the south side of the city. No scandals. No lawsuits. No hidden agenda. Victoria slowly closed the folder. Somehow that made her smile even more. Over the next several weeks, she found herself thinking about them often. More often than she cared to admit. Then one Saturday morning, she spotted a flyer while leaving a neighborhood coffee shop. Lincoln Elementary Fall Festival. Family event. Open to the public. Her eyes settled on a familiar name among the student art exhibits. Sophie Walker. She stood there for several seconds, staring at the paper. Logic told her to continue walking. Common sense told her their meeting had simply been a beautiful coincidence. Yet another part of her, a quieter part she had ignored for years, told her something different. Later that afternoon, she found herself standing near the edge of the school festival, surrounded by food trucks, handmade decorations, and families enjoying the crisp autumn weather. Children laughed as they raced between booths. The scent of kettle corn drifted through the cool air. Victoria wore simple clothes and dark sunglasses. Nobody recognized her. Then she saw them. Ethan was helping arrange wooden display stands near the art tent. Sophie stood beside him proudly explaining her artwork to anyone willing to listen. Victoria felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. She had not planned to approach them. She had not planned anything at all. Yet as Sophie suddenly looked up and spotted her across the crowd, the little girl's face lit up like Christmas morning. And in that instant, Victoria realized this would not be the last time their paths crossed. Over the following month, Victoria's appearances became an unexpected part of Ethan and Sophie's lives. Sometimes she showed up at a weekend community market. Sometimes she appeared at a school fundraiser. Other times she simply joined them for coffee and hot chocolate on a chilly Saturday morning. She never spoke about business. She never mentioned wealth. She listened more than she talked. And somehow that made her presence feel natural. Sophie adored her. Ethan respected her. Yet neither knew the truth. Then winter arrived. Gray clouds settled over Chicago. Cold winds swept through the city streets. Holiday decorations began appearing in store windows. At Ethan's workshop, however, the season brought something far less cheerful. One Monday morning, he stood alone inside the building staring at an email on his computer screen. His largest commercial client had canceled a contract worth nearly half his annual revenue. Ethan read the message twice. Then a third time. The words never changed. Due to restructuring, budget reductions, project postponed indefinitely. He leaned back slowly and rubbed his eyes. The scent of sawdust filled the workshop. Half-finished furniture stood beneath overhead lights. A handcrafted dining table waited for final polishing. A walnut bookshelf stood ready for delivery. Yet suddenly none of it felt secure. Later that week, the situation worsened. Another customer delayed payment. A supplier increased material costs. Then came the letter from the bank. Ethan opened it at his kitchen table after Sophie had gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of a wall clock. He read the notice carefully. His business loan renewal had been denied. The bank required immediate restructuring of existing obligations. Ethan lowered the paper slowly. Through the window, snow drifted beneath a streetlight outside. For several minutes, he simply sat there. The house around him carried memories in every corner. The hallway where Sophie learned to ride a small scooter indoors despite his protests. The living room where Christmas mornings had unfolded. The kitchen where his late wife once laughed while teaching Sophie how to bake cookies. This was not just a house. It was the last place where all their memories still lived together. Yet now he was not sure how long he could keep it. The next morning he arrived at the workshop before sunrise. The sky remained dark. Frost covered parked vehicles. Inside, the building felt colder than usual. Ethan switched on the lights and stared across the empty space. For the first time in years, doubt crept into his thoughts. Had he failed? Had all those years of hard work been leading here? A few hours later his phone buzzed. Victoria's name appeared on the screen. He considered ignoring the call. Not because he did not want to talk to her. Because he did not want anyone seeing him discouraged. But eventually he answered. "Good morning," she said warmly. "How is your day going?" Ethan forced a smile she could not see. "Busy." There was a brief pause. "You do not sound busy," Victoria replied gently. Ethan stared out the workshop window as snowflakes drifted past. "Just dealing with a few things." Another pause followed. Long enough for honesty to feel possible. Victoria looked out from her office hundreds of feet above the city. Something in his voice unsettled her. The quiet confidence she had come to admire seemed strained. "Ethan," she said softly, "are you okay?" He glanced around the workshop one more time. The unfinished projects. The unpaid invoices. The uncertain future. Then he answered with a truth he had not spoken aloud to anyone. Honestly, Victoria, I do not know. And for the first time since meeting him, she heard real worry beneath his calm exterior. Victoria ended the call, but Ethan's voice remained with her. Not the words themselves, the weight behind them. During the months she had known him, he had always carried himself with quiet dignity. He never complained. He never asked for favors. He never tried to impress anyone. Yet for the first time she had heard uncertainty. That evening snow fell steadily across Chicago as Victoria sat alone in her penthouse. The city lights shimmered beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. A fire glowed softly in the corner. Her dinner sat untouched. Instead, she held Sophie's drawing in her hands. The folded napkin had become one of her most treasured possessions. Best birthday ever. Such simple words. Such extraordinary meaning. Her eyes drifted toward the skyline. Then toward the folder she had once requested about Ethan Walker. She opened it again. Not because she needed information. Because she wanted clarity. Every page confirmed what she already knew. Ethan was not looking for rescue. He was fighting to preserve something he loved. His workshop. His home. His daughter's future. Victoria closed the folder and made a decision. The next morning, a winter storm blanketed the city in fresh snow. Ethan arrived at the workshop before sunrise. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside carrying a travel mug of coffee. The building felt quieter than usual. Too quiet. He switched on the lights and began reviewing invoices. Numbers stared back at him from every direction. Outstanding balances. Loan obligations. Material costs. Deadlines. The arithmetic of worry. Around mid-morning, someone knocked on the workshop door. Ethan looked up. Victoria stood outside wearing a wool coat and boots dusted with snow. He immediately smiled despite everything. "You came all the way out here in this weather?" Victoria stepped inside and looked around. The workshop smelled of cedar, walnut, and fresh-cut pine. Sunlight filtered through frosted windows. Handcrafted furniture lined the room like unfinished stories waiting for their endings. "I wanted to see where the magic happens," she said. Ethan laughed softly. Magic might be overstating it. Victoria walked slowly among the pieces. Her fingers brushed across smooth wood surfaces. She examined a rocking chair, a bookshelf, a dining table still awaiting its final finish. "These are beautiful," she said honestly. Ethan shrugged. "People do not always agree. Then people are wrong." For the first time in days, Ethan smiled without forcing it. They spent nearly an hour talking. Not about money. Not about problems. About craftsmanship. About creativity. About why certain pieces mattered more than others. Finally, Victoria stopped beside a large conference table nearing completion. "Who ordered this?" Ethan looked away briefly. Nobody now. It was part of the contract that got canceled. Silence settled between them. Victoria understood immediately. The table represented more than lost revenue. It represented lost opportunity, lost stability, lost momentum. She ran her hand across the polished surface. Then she looked at Ethan. What if someone needed custom furniture for several corporate locations? Ethan frowned slightly. That would be a fortunate coincidence. Victoria smiled. What if that someone appreciated quality? Ethan folded his arms. Victoria. Yes. What are you doing? She met his gaze directly, offering an opportunity. Ethan remained quiet. The distinction mattered. She was not offering charity, not offering a handout, not trying to save him. She was offering work. Real work. Earned work. Respectful work. Victoria reached into her bag and removed a sealed envelope. "Do not open it yet." Ethan accepted it cautiously. "What is it?" "A proposal." His eyebrows lifted. "For furniture?" "For craftsmanship." She smiled. "Read it later." Then she headed toward the door. Snowflakes swirled beyond the glass. Ethan followed her outside. "Victoria." She turned. "Thank you." Her expression softened. "No, Ethan. Thank you." He looked confused. Victoria glanced toward the envelope still in his hand. "You gave a lonely stranger a seat when nobody else did." For a moment, neither spoke. Snow drifted gently between them. The city seemed far away. Then Victoria smiled and walked toward her waiting car. Ethan stood in the falling snow holding the envelope. He had no idea that inside was the beginning of something far larger than a business opportunity. And he still had no idea who Victoria Hayes truly was. The envelope remained unopened until late that evening. Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table after Sophie had gone upstairs to finish her homework. Outside, snow continued falling across the neighborhood, coating rooftops and sidewalks in white. The house was quiet except for the occasional creak of old wood settling against the winter cold. He finally broke the seal and removed the documents inside. As he read the proposal, his eyes widened. The opportunity was substantial. Multiple locations, custom furniture installations, long-term contracts, enough work to keep his workshop running for years. Yet what surprised him most was not the scale. It was the fairness. The pricing was reasonable. The expectations were realistic. Nothing about it felt like charity. It felt like someone had looked at his work and believed in it. For the first time in weeks, Ethan slept peacefully. The months that followed brought gradual change. New orders arrived. The workshop became busy again. Employees who had feared layoffs kept their jobs. Suppliers returned his calls. Bills were paid on time. The anxiety that had shadowed every decision slowly began to lift. Through it all, Victoria remained a regular part of their lives. She attended Sophie's winter art show. She joined them for lunch after church fundraisers. She listened to Ethan describe woodworking projects with the same attention most people reserved for million-dollar investments. And somehow, despite spending more time together, she never once mentioned her career. Then, one Saturday afternoon, everything changed. Sophie was working on a school assignment at the dining room table while Ethan reviewed measurements for a furniture installation. The television played quietly in the background. Neither paid much attention until Sophie's voice suddenly broke the silence. "Daddy." Ethan looked up. "What is it?" Sophie pointed toward the television screen. "That is Victoria." Ethan glanced over casually. Then he froze. A business news program filled the screen. Behind the anchor appeared a photograph of a familiar woman standing in front of a luxury hotel. Beneath the image ran a headline: Victoria Hayes named most influential hospitality executive in America. Ethan stared. The room seemed strangely still. The report continued. It detailed billion-dollar acquisitions, international properties, corporate expansions, industry awards. Numbers so large they barely seemed real. Sophie looked back and forth between the television and her father. "That is our Victoria." Ethan slowly lowered the papers in his hand. "I think it is." The report ended a few moments later, but neither spoke immediately. Finally, Sophie broke the silence. "She never told us." Ethan nodded. "No, she did not." Later that evening, he sat alone in the workshop replaying every conversation in his mind. Suddenly, pieces began falling into place. The private cars, the unusual knowledge of business, the proposal that had arrived exactly when he needed it most. Yet the more he thought about it, the more one realization stood above all the others. Victoria had never used her wealth to impress him. Not once. She never mentioned her accomplishments, never talked about private jets, never discussed luxury properties. She never tried to make herself appear important. Instead, she asked about Sophie. She asked about woodworking. She asked about family memories, the things that mattered. Ethan leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. In a world where many people led with status, Victoria had led with kindness. His phone buzzed. A text message appeared. It was from Victoria. Simple, casual, exactly like every message she had ever sent. "Hope you and Sophie are having a good weekend." Ethan smiled despite himself. For several seconds, he looked at the screen. Then he typed a response. "We need to talk." A few moments later, her reply appeared. Did Sophie discover Forbes again? Ethan laughed out loud. The answer told him everything. She had known this day would come. And for the first time since learning the truth, he realized something even more surprising. Knowing who Victoria Hayes was changed almost nothing about how he felt toward her. Edit 1 year later, the city shimmered beneath another October sky. The same restaurant stood glowing warmly against the evening streets of Chicago, its windows reflecting thousands of lights across the downtown skyline. Inside, every detail had been prepared with extraordinary care. Fresh flowers decorated each table. Soft piano music drifted through the dining room. Staff members moved quietly through the room, making final preparations. Yet the most important table in the restaurant was not the largest one. It was not near the window. It was not hidden inside a private dining suite. It sat near the back of the room where an ordinary father and his daughter had once shared a simple meal. Victoria arrived first. She wore a dark blue dress and a small silver necklace Sophie had given her months earlier for Christmas. The hostess greeted her immediately. Every employee in the building knew exactly who she was now. Yet Victoria simply smiled and walked toward the table she had personally requested. When she reached it, Her eyes immediately found the small sign resting on the empty chair beside her. Reserved for family. For a moment, she could not move. 12 months earlier, she had stood alone near a restaurant door wondering if anyone would notice she existed. Tonight, she stared at a chair that represented everything she once believed she would never have. Around her, conversations quieted. Employees watched discreetly from a distance. They knew the story, not the headlines, not the business success. The real story, the one about kindness, the one about an empty chair. Victoria sat down and gently touched the sign. Her eyes glistened. She remembered the birthday when nobody had room for her. She remembered Sophie's hug. She remembered Ethan standing up and offering a seat without asking who she was. In a world obsessed with status, he had treated her like a person. Nothing more, nothing less. The restaurant doors opened. Victoria looked up. Ethan entered holding Sophie's hand. Sophie was taller now, more confident, more mature, yet her smile remained exactly the same. The moment she spotted Victoria, she rushed forward. Happy birthday. Victoria laughed through tears and embraced her tightly. Thank you, sweetheart. Ethan approached more slowly. There was warmth in his eyes that needed no explanation. During the past year, their friendship had grown into something neither of them had expected. Not because of wealth, not because of success, because they had learned to trust each other, to respect each other, to share both victories and fears. Sophie suddenly pointed toward the empty chair. Look, Victoria. Victoria glanced down. The sign remained exactly where it was. Reserved for family. She pressed a hand against her mouth. Ethan pulled out the chair beside her and sat down. For a few moments, Knob.